Yo, what is going on, everyone? I am back with another review video. It is actually going to be on two mice. It is going to be on my HSK and HTX, both in 4K. Thank you so much to G-Wolves for sending both out. Definitely one of the most interesting things that I have been sent. And it was a really nice experience to try the HSK and really dial in on trying to get used to fingertip. While I don't think I could ever get used to using just purely fingertip grip, I think that this mouse is still really good for that grip, but I will get into why later. But as per usual, I just want to get over the initial quality of the mouse itself, because I have had it for a few months, which is definitely what I prefer to do for G-Wolves mice specifically, because I have had at least two G-Wolves mice, kind of break within the first few months, and the last thing I wanted was for a $180 mouse to break while testing it. So that is actually why I gave it such a long adjustment period. So first off, the clicks. Both clicks are amazing. They're using zippy 60M switches, and they feel absolutely fantastic. They are still clicky, like just as tactile as day one on both the HTX and the HSK. They feel absolutely fantastic, and I actually do prefer these way more than my normal Kale 8.0s. So I do feel like now that, we made that huge jump from, oh, every company should be using 8.0s. Now every company should be using zippy 60s mils. These are fantastic, honestly. Now, talking about both scroll wheels, they are absolutely fantastic. They are still heavy enough for where I prefer it, because I do prefer a slightly heavier tactile switches. But the biggest thing is that it still retains the ease of movement. So it isn't hard to get it to move, but it still retains a lot of that tactileness. But this one especially is definitely harder to move, much more noticeably than the HTX. I'm not too sure why, but the HSK scroll wheel is definitely harder to move. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the sensor placement. On the HSK, it is slightly pushed more forward, and the HTX is actually perfectly in the middle of the mouse. And I think specifically for fingertip, the sensor placement should kind of always be a little bit more towards the top, mainly because the sensor will be near your fingertips, which is personally where I think that is where the sensor should be. It should be wherever your fingertips are. So for claw, I always want it near there, and I hit the DPI button. But it should always be near there, which it kind of is, but it is slightly moved forward, and you definitely do notice it. I definitely feel like movements like this, where if you're using more of your wrist, it's going to be a lot better if the sensor is slightly forward. If you use more of your arm, I don't think it really matters whether it's forward at all, but if you use more of your wrist, it'll definitely feel a lot more snappy if the sensor placement is slightly more forward, which is what I think both mice gear towards. The next thing I want to talk about are the side buttons. These side buttons feel absolutely fantastic. They're not as tactile as something like an XM1R, but they're placed very well. If I'm using claw or if I am using fingertip, my finger for my thumb, at least for fingertip, is going to be slightly more towards the rear, but if I go ahead and claw, it'll be right under both. This one is definitely a lot weirder. It is fully towards the back. Again, the feeling of the switch is perfectly fine. There's no issue with that at all. But I do think that you would want it slightly more forward, or at least more separated, because they're so close together, depending on how big your thumb is, which is, both buttons are the size of just my thumb. So if I'm using this grip, I have to pull my thumb a lot further back to hit the rear. To hit the front, it's not so bad, but I think it should be at least spaced out a little bit more between these two. I feel like the spacing in the middle should be a little bit further apart, and then I do feel like they should be more further towards the top of the mouse just for fingertip, because I feel like when I'm doing this, I already don't have a lot of stability with the mouse in general, because there is no palm contact. And then to pull my thumb further back, it kind of does this, where it moves slightly like that. I'm exaggerating it more, but it does move like this. So it is a lot more irritating to hit this back one rather than the front. The front is perfectly fine. The next thing I want to talk about are the feet. The G-Wolves Classic, they're very slow. They feel a lot like core pads, so they are much more on the controlled side. So for Valorant, it should be very easy to use, especially because these mice are very light. So it doesn't really matter, but I would have preferred a slightly lower initial friction feet with a little bit less stopping power. It would have been pretty nice. And the other thing too is they come pre-installed with dots, except for the HSK. The HTX came pre-installed with dots, but the HSK came like this. And I really do like the bigger feet. I don't really prefer dots because it makes the mouse feel uneven to me. I have like stability issues with it wobbling, but obviously you can see with this, it doesn't really wobble. I'm like pushing into my pad, which is an X-Soft, so it'll be moving a lot more. The next thing I want to talk about is the implementation of their 4K, because both are 4K products. So with that, it comes with the very heavy price tag of $180 before shipping and tax. And that is huge. That is a very, very steep jump from Razer's $150. But really, is it all that difference when you have to pair it with the Razer dongle? No, it is not. The biggest difference is you have to pay for shipping with G-Wolves, and it takes much longer than it would for Razer. So really, price, I don't really care to talk about. They are implemented perfect. They feel exactly the same as Razer's 4K. If you are saying anything different, you are probably on crack. It feels exactly the same as Razer's implementation of 4K, and the price is pretty much the exact same. Whether you got a Death Adder V3 and you got the dongle, both brand new, would be the same. So I do not care to talk about price at all. And the last thing is the overall shape. So the HTX, I will be talking about a lot more than the HSK, so I will be talking about the HSK first for shape, and the slight changes I would actually like to be made for this mouse in particular. But this mouse, I will actually have 2 other mice to compare it to, and it'll be hopefully a lot more in depth than what most people are seeing. So first off with the HSK, the biggest thing that I noticed when first using this mouse, yes, it took a few days for me to adjust because I am an avid claw grip enthusiast, so it was pretty difficult for me to get used to the new style of grip. That was definitely the #1 off-putting thing. But the other thing too is I tried the HSK Plus before. So the biggest thing with the difference between the HSK Pro and the HSK Plus, you can kind of tell the HSK Pro on the bottom here, the flare is going to be huge at the back with no side curvature whatsoever. So it is pretty immediate that you're going to feel that extra width at the bottom of the mouse. And with the HSK Plus, the one that I tried beforehand, the top part of the mouse was much wider than the bottom, which is how I kind of feel like it should be, depending on if you grip it really far forward or grip it really far back. I tended to grip it somewhere in the middle, and because of gripping it in the middle, it did create my pinky over here and the back portion of my thumb to just get really uncomfortable, just because it was just such a massive jump in width between where my ring finger was and the top portion of my thumb. So for the HSK, I want to compare it to these 2 mice in particular, the Starlight Small and the Vancer Caster. The biggest reason the Vancer Caster is here is because it is like a Starlight Medium, basically. And the HSK is slightly in the middle of both. It is very, very confusing on how I'm going to try to explain this, but I'm going to do it to the best of my ability as I can. Now, out of all 3, the HTX definitely lands in the middle size-wise. It's definitely nowhere near as small as a Starlight Small, but it is not as palm-filling as a Vancer Caster. And the biggest reason is the drop-off. It is very, very sharp. It is also a very flat mouse, so you get very little palm contact. With the Caster, I get tons of palm contact. It feels really good. But the biggest difference is just this mouse is more narrow and it doesn't fill the palm as much. Not that it really affects my aiming for claw in particular. The biggest thing is just, it's just not as filling. So stability will sacrifice a little bit, but because of the lightweight nature and the controlled feet, it does actually kind of balance it out a little bit. But the biggest way I can describe it is it feels like a Starlight Small, but the length of a Caster. It's super confusing. Just try to bear with me. With the Starlight Small, you can see that my fingertips lay all the way at the front, and then the width also is actually not as narrow feeling as the HTX. The HTX feels much more narrow because the curvature is much more aggressive than the Starlight. It is almost flat. It's eerily similar to something like a G Pro-esque side curvature. So usually leaving my fingers all the way to the top are very, very comfortable because, like I said, it's not like the HTX where it has like that super steep like slant at the bottom, or I guess it would be like this. It would slant really hard at the bottom as opposed to it being almost just completely flat, much like an X2 or like a Fanatic Bolt, really. The other thing too is the Vancer Caster is very similar. It's not as aggressive. There's a much more aggressive top curve than the bottom, but unlike the HTX, it's going to be a lot more comfortable. I prefer this a lot more. I prefer things with a very prominent side curvature, and the back flare is just super aggressive. It's like right in your face because it locks my fingers. I can't slip at all, even if the coating is bad, which, by the way, both mice, good coating. I only have grips on this because it was almost impossible to actually hold my fingers on this mouse. So I think adding the grips, because G-Wolves makes the oh my god, like these grips are amazing. They're very close to like core pad grips. They're actually like super sticky. I love it. But yeah, so there's no issue with coating, but pulling the mouse in, I can grip it constantly the same way the entire time I'm playing, and that is what I love about this mouse, especially the side curves. But like I said, if you just want it in layman's terms, it is pretty much the back hump of a Starlight Small, but the length of a caster. It's super confusing. That is pretty much just the best of my ability to just make it in as layman's terms as humanly possible. It is a completely unique shape. It is also nothing like a Viper Mini. This is way flatter than a Viper Mini, which is why I feel like it's one of their more versatile shapes. I know that I did a review of their HTS Plus, and I like that shape a lot. This one is probably my second favorite shape, mainly because, like I said, it's flat. I don't get a lot of back support, so that's just going to be like a preference thing. But this is much more versatile. I think that mouse, it'd be pretty hard to fingertip, depending on how low you keep your fingers, because I noticed I don't like any contact up here if I'm fingertipping, which is what I do get with the HTX. I don't get any of that. It is just pure fingertip, which is great. It also depends on hand size as well. But yeah, that's pretty much all for my review. I hope I covered everything, at least as close as possible. Was a whole lot of talking, and you know, it was pretty interesting to get back into the things of reviewing again. I also did want to just pair these two together because I felt like, you know, got them in the same package, had them for the same amount of time. Would just be a lot easier for me to just clump them together. But yeah, my next review, I'm not sure what it'll be on, but I probably will have another one maybe tomorrow or the day after. I'm starting to finally catch up on a lot of things. I'm also going to just bulk put things together depending on what they are. This is also the Super Bing Lab Memoria pad. This pad is amazing. I actually really like this pad. But yeah, this pad will probably get its own review in maybe 2 weeks or a little longer. But yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you on the next review. Peace.